The story of the gladiators, those iconic figures of ancient Rome, truly begins not in the bustling forum or the colossal amphitheaters, but in the sombre, mist-shrouded lands of Etruria, long before Rome's grandeur was fully imagined. It was here, amongst a people whose language and many customs remain enigmatic even today, that the seeds of these brutal yet captivating spectacles were sown, sometime around the 7th or 6th century BCE. Imagine a world where the veil between life and death felt thinner, where the spirits of the departed were believed to linger, demanding sustenance and remembrance. For the Etruscans, a sophisticated civilization flourishing north of Rome, funerary rites were not merely a farewell, but an elaborate performance, a bridge connecting the living and the dead. These early rituals, often depicted in vibrant tomb paintings and carved reliefs, weren't the grand public displays we associate with later Roman games. Instead, they were more intimate, more sacred. When a prominent Etruscan noble or warrior passed, it was believed their spirit required a blood offering to ease its journey into the afterlife, to appease the chthonic deities, and perhaps to reinforce the deceased's status even beyond the grave. This wasn't a human sacrifice in the traditional sense, but rather a contest, a duel fought to the death or to first blood, between individuals who were often captives, slaves, or even willing participants seeking honor or freedom. These duels, known as munera, a term that originally meant duty or offering, were performed at the graveside, a solemn tribute to the deceased. One can almost picture the scene, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows on ancient stone, the hushed crowd gathered, the clash of bronze and leather, the air thick with the scent of earth and sacrifice. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for these Etruscan origins comes from a 4th century BCE tomb painting in Tarquinia, depicting two men fighting with swords, accompanied by a figure who appears to be an overseer or referee. Another significant find, from the necropolis of Paestum, dating to the 4th century BCE, shows similar armed combatants, further underscoring the prevalence of these funerary games. These weren't just random fights, they were ritualized performances, imbued with deep religious and social significance. The concept was that the shedding of blood would purify the community, honor the dead, and perhaps even ensure the fertility of the land. As Rome began its ascent, slowly absorbing or influencing its neighbors, it encountered these Etruscan customs. The Romans, ever practical and adaptable, saw the potential in these munera. They appreciated the martial prowess displayed, the discipline, and the spectacle. Initially, these duels remained private affairs, still tied to funerals. But as Rome grew in power and its aristocracy in wealth, the scale of these events began to swell. The first recorded gladiatorial contest in Rome itself took place in 264 BCE during the early Punic Wars. It was held in the Forum Boarium, Rome's cattle market, a place of commerce and public gathering, not a dedicated arena. Decimus Junius Brutus Pera and his brother Marcus, sons of a recently deceased senator named Decimus Junius Brutus Sceva, organized a munus in honor of their father. 3 pairs of gladiators, likely war captives, fought to the death. This was a pivotal moment, marking the transition of these games from a purely Etruscan funerary rite to an emerging Roman spectacle, still rooted in ancestor veneration, but now with an added layer of public display and political maneuvering. The shift wasn't immediate, but it was inexorable. Over the next century, these munera became more frequent and more elaborate. What began as a solemn duty to the dead gradually transformed into a lavish demonstration of the living's power and generosity. Aristocratic families, vying for prestige and public favor, began to sponsor larger and more spectacular games. The number of gladiators involved grew from a handful to dozens, then hundreds. These events were still theoretically linked to funerals, but the connection became increasingly tenuous. They might be held months or even years after a death, sometimes in memory of a distant ancestor, serving more as a thinly veiled excuse for a public festival. Historians still debate the precise moment when the religious significance of the munus truly gave way to its role as entertainment and political propaganda. Was it a gradual erosion or a more conscious appropriation by Roman elites? Some scholars argue that the Romans, with their pragmatic approach to religion, simply saw an effective ritual and adapted it to their own social and political needs, without necessarily stripping it of all sacred meaning. Others contend that the entertainment value quickly overshadowed any spiritual purpose, especially as the games moved from gravesides to public spaces. It's likely a blend of both. The sacred lingered, but the profane, in the form of public adulation and political gain, became the dominant force. The very word gladiator itself, derived from gladius, the Latin word for a short sword, points to this Roman adaptation. The Etruscans may have had their armed combatants, but the Romans gave them a name that would echo through history. These early gladiators were often prisoners of war, condemned criminals, or slaves forced into combat. For many, it was a grim fate, a violent end to a life already stripped of dignity. Yet for some, it offered a slim chance at glory, wealth, or even freedom, a desperate gamble against the odds. As the Republic matured, so too did the organization of the games. Specialized training schools, or ludi, began to emerge, particularly in Campania, a region south of Rome renowned for its martial traditions and its robust athletic population. Capua, in particular, became a hub for gladiatorial training, home to the famous ludus of Lentulus Batiatus, from which Spartacus would famously launch his revolt in 73 BCE. These ludi were harsh, disciplined environments, where men were trained not just in combat, but in showmanship, in the art of engaging the crowd. They learned various fighting styles, specializing in different weapons and armor, becoming distinct gladiator types. The Thrax, with his small shield and curved sword, the Murmillo, with his fish-crested helmet, the Retiarus, with his net and trident. This specialization added another layer of intrigue and variety to the spectacles, allowing for diverse matchups and tactical displays. The evolution of the gladiatorial games was also deeply intertwined with the political landscape of the Roman Republic. As powerful individuals and factions competed for influence, the ability to stage magnificent games became a crucial tool. A successful munus could win votes, cement alliances, and elevate one's standing in the eyes of the populace. The people, or plebs, loved a good show, and their favor was essential for any aspiring politician. By providing free entertainment, lavish feasts, and sometimes even gifts, the Roman elite engaged in a form of indirect bribery, securing popular support through spectacle. This practice, known as panem et circenses, bread and circuses, became a hallmark of Roman political life. Imagine the sensory overload of such an event, even in its early stages. The roar of the crowd, the clang of steel on steel, the shouts of the combatants, the smell of sweat and blood and dust. Even without the grand amphitheaters of the later empire, the energy would have been palpable. The Forum, the heart of Roman public life, would be temporarily transformed into an arena with makeshift seating erected for the spectators. The contrast between the mundane daily activities of the forum and the sudden eruption of violent spectacle must have been striking, a testament to the Roman capacity for both order and chaos. One lesser-known detail about these early games is the role of female spectators. While later Roman society often relegated women to specific, segregated seating at public events, evidence suggests that in the early Republic, women were often present and sometimes even sat alongside men at these games. This speaks to a slightly different social dynamic than what would emerge in the Imperial period, where moralists would increasingly decry the presence of women at such unseemly spectacles. Perhaps the earlier, more ritualistic nature of the games made their presence more acceptable, or perhaps the social norms were simply less rigid. The transition from solemn Etruscan rite to Roman public spectacle was not a linear path, but a winding one, shaped by religious belief, political ambition, and the evolving tastes of a burgeoning empire. The Romans, with their genius for organization and their insatiable appetite for grand displays, took a foreign custom and made it quintessentially their own, transforming it into an institution that would endure for centuries, defining an era and leaving an indelible mark on history. These early games, though perhaps less elaborate than their later counterparts, laid the groundwork for the colossal spectacles that would one day fill the Colosseum, forging a legacy of blood, honor, and entertainment that continues to fascinate and disturb us today. If you're enjoying this, make sure to subscribe and leave in the comments the time and place you're listening from. The dust of the arena, still settling from those early somber rites, would soon be stirred by a different kind of ambition. As Rome transitioned from a fledgling city-state to a burgeoning republic, the gladiatorial games began to shed their purely funerary origins, slowly but inexorably transforming into a spectacle woven into the very fabric of public life. It was a gradual evolution, much like the slow, deliberate growth of a mighty oak, its roots deepening with each passing generation. The 3rd century BCE marked a pivotal shift. No longer confined to the solemn commemoration of the deceased, gladiatorial contests started appearing in other public contexts. We find mentions of them accompanying triumphal processions, those grand parades celebrating victorious generals and their conquests. Imagine the scene: the clatter of armor, the shouts of the crowd, the exotic animals paraded through the streets. And then, as a climax, the clash of gladiators, a visceral echo of the battlefield brought into the city's heart. This association with military triumph was a natural progression, cementing the game's connection to Roman martial prowess and the glorification of valor. By the 2nd century BCE, the games were firmly established as a form of public entertainment, often sponsored by wealthy individuals or aspiring politicians. These men, known as editores, understood the power of spectacle. In a society where public office was often decided by popular vote, winning the favor of the masses was paramount. What better way to achieve this than by providing lavish entertainment, a dazzling display of courage and skill that captivated the Roman populace? The more spectacular the games, the more generous the editor, the more likely he was to earn the goodwill of the people. This was a direct, tangible investment in political capital, a strategy that would only intensify as the Republic matured. The scale of these events began to grow exponentially. Early contests might have involved a handful of pairs, but as the Republic expanded its reach and its coffers, so too did the number of gladiators. Accounts from the late Republic speak of hundreds, even thousands, of gladiators participating in a single series of games. Think of the logistical challenge alone. Training, housing, feeding, and arming such a vast number of combatants. It speaks to the immense resources and organizational capabilities of Rome, even in this earlier period. One of the most significant developments during this era was the diversification of gladiatorial types. The early Samnite and Thracian fighters, inspired by Rome's early adversaries, were soon joined by others. The Murmillo, with his fish-crested helmet and short sword, the Retiarius, with his net and trident, and the Secutor, the pursuer, often pitted against the Retiarius in a classic pairing of speed against brute force. Each type had its distinct armor, weapons, and fighting style, creating a rich tapestry of combat that offered endless variations for the discerning spectator. This specialization wasn't merely for show. It reflected a growing understanding of different combat techniques and a desire to create exciting, balanced matchups. Historians still debate whether these distinct styles truly evolved organically from battlefield tactics, or if they were largely theatrical constructs designed to enhance the spectacle. Perhaps it was a blend of both, with a kernel of military practicality exaggerated and refined for the arena. The late Roman Republic, a period of immense social upheaval and political ambition, proved to be fertile ground for the gladiatorial phenomenon. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, who attempted sweeping land reforms in the mid-2nd century BCE, understood the power of the populace, though their reforms ultimately led to their violent deaths. Their era, and the decades that followed, saw an increasing polarization between the wealthy elite and the sires. Struggling plebeians. In this charged atmosphere, public games, especially the gladiatorial contests, became a crucial tool for both appeasement and political advancement. Consider the example of Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great, one of the most powerful figures of the late Republic. His triumphal games in 81 BCE, celebrating his victories in Africa, were legendary. They reportedly featured an unprecedented number of gladiators and exotic animal hunts, including elephants, a sight that would have been utterly astonishing to the Roman public. Pompey understood that such spectacles solidified his image as a conquering hero and a generous patron. These events weren't just entertainment. They were carefully curated political statements designed to project power, wealth, and influence. The sheer scale of these games also led to the establishment of specialized gladiatorial schools, or ludi. These were not merely training camps. They were often harsh, disciplined institutions where men, mostly slaves or prisoners of war, were rigorously trained in the art of combat. The lanista, the owner and manager of a ludus, was a figure of considerable wealth and influence, often lending or selling his gladiators to editors for public games. These schools became significant enterprises, a testament to the economic power generated by the gladiatorial industry. Imagine the clanging of steel, the grunts of exertion, the shouts of the trainers echoing through the courtyards of these ludi, day in and day out. One lesser-known detail from this period is the existence of female gladiators, or gladiatrices. While rare and often considered a novelty, there is archaeological and literary evidence suggesting that women did occasionally fight in the arena. A relief from Halicarnassus, dating to the 1st or 2nd century CE, depicts two female gladiators, Amazon and Achilles, fighting in armor. While their presence was certainly not as common as male gladiators, their existence challenges the traditional image of the arena as an exclusively male domain and offers a fascinating glimpse into the more unconventional aspects of Roman entertainment. These women, perhaps seeking fame, freedom, or simply a different path from societal norms, defied expectations in a male-dominated world. The late Republic also saw the rise of truly iconic figures among the gladiators themselves. Spartacus, a Thracian gladiator who led a massive slave revolt from 73 to 71 BCE, remains perhaps the most famous. His story, though heavily romanticized over the centuries, is a stark reminder of the desperate conditions under which many gladiators lived and the explosive potential for resistance. Spartacus and his followers, initially numbering only 70 gladiators from a ludus in Capua, grew into an army of tens of thousands, challenging the might of Rome for 2 years. His rebellion sent shockwaves through Roman society, highlighting the inherent instability of a system reliant on vast numbers of enslaved people. While ultimately crushed, the Spartacus revolt left an indelible mark on the Roman psyche, a haunting testament to the human cost of their spectacles. The political machinations of the late Republic, characterized by powerful individuals like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Caesar, further fueled the gladiatorial craze. These ambitious men, vying for dominance, understood that controlling public opinion was as vital as commanding armies. And nothing swayed public opinion quite like a magnificent show. Julius Caesar, in particular, was a master of this art. During his aedileship in 65 BCE, he staged games so extravagant that they were almost banned by the Senate for fear of bankrupting the treasury and setting an impossible precedent. He reportedly presented 320 pairs of gladiators, a staggering number, and adorned them in silver armor, a spectacle of unparalleled opulence. This was not merely entertainment, it was a demonstration of wealth, power, and a subtle challenge to the established order. Caesar's games were a clear indication of how gladiatorial contests had become intertwined with personal glory and political propaganda. Each spectacle was a carefully orchestrated performance, not just of combat, but of the editor's generosity and influence. The roar of the crowd was not just for the gladiators, it was also for the man who provided the spectacle. This symbiotic relationship between politics and entertainment would only intensify as the Republic teetered on the brink of collapse and gave way to the Empire. The moral implications of these spectacles were not entirely lost on Roman society, even in this period. Philosophers and moralists occasionally voiced concerns about the brutality and the dehumanizing aspects of the games. Seneca, a later Stoic philosopher, would famously decry the senseless slaughter. Even in the Republic, some voiced unease, though their voices were often drowned out by the clamor of the crowd and the allure of political gain. The Roman elite, while enjoying the games, also maintained a certain distance, viewing gladiators as necessary but ultimately low-status figures, often slaves or condemned criminals. Yet there was also an undeniable fascination with their courage, their skill, and their willingness to face death with honor. The expansion of Rome's empire also played a role in the gladiatorial phenomenon. As Rome conquered new territories, it acquired vast numbers of prisoners of war, many of whom were destined for the mines, the fields, or the gladiatorial schools. This constant influx of new recruits ensured a steady supply of fighters, allowing the games to grow ever larger and more frequent. The diversity of gladiatorial types also reflected this imperial expansion, with fighters often named after conquered peoples, a symbolic assertion of Roman dominance. So, as the Republic moved into its tumultuous final century, the gladiatorial games were no longer a solemn, infrequent ritual. They were a vibrant, integral part of Roman public life, deeply embedded in its political landscape, its economy, and its social fabric. From the modest funerary rites of the past, they had blossomed into a grand, often brutal, spectacle, a mirror reflecting Rome's ambition, its power, and its complex relationship with violence and entertainment. The sands of the arena had absorbed the blood of countless men, each drop a testament to the evolving tastes and political machinations of a civilization on the cusp of its greatest transformation. The stage was set for the emperors to take the reins, and with them, the gladiatorial games would reach their zenith, becoming an even more potent symbol of Roman power and imperial might. The roar of the crowd, the glint of steel under the Roman sun, these were the eventual destinations, but the journey began far from the arena's dazzling spectacle, in the grim, enclosed world of the ludus. This was the Gladiator school, a place of iron discipline and unyielding routine, where men were forged into fighting machines, their very identities stripped away and replaced with the promise of survival, or the certainty of a glorious death. For many, the path to the ludus was not chosen but imposed. War captives, condemned criminals, rebellious slaves, these were the primary recruits, their lives already forfeit, their futures dictated by the whims of their Roman captors. Imagine the terror of being dragged from a battlefield, your homeland lost, your freedom a distant memory, only to be thrust into a new form of servitude, one that promised a violent end. Some, however, chose this life, driven by desperation, debt, or a thirst for fame. These were the auctorati, free men who voluntarily sold themselves into gladiatorial service, signing a contract, the auctoramentum, that legally bound them to their lanista, the owner and trainer of the ludus. This contract was a solemn oath, an agreement to endure burning, binding, beating, and death by the sword, uri, vincere, verberare, feroque necari. It was a chilling testament to the extreme measures some would take to escape poverty, or to grasp at a fleeting chance at glory. Once inside the ludus, all men, regardless of their origin, became novici, raw recruits. The air would have been thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and the metallic tang of blood from the training grounds. The lanista, a figure often reviled but undeniably shrewd, held absolute power over his gladiators. He was a businessman, an investor in flesh and blood, and his primary goal was to hone these men into valuable assets. His reputation and his fortune depended on the skill and spectacle his gladiators could provide. Beneath him were the doctores, veteran gladiators or retired fighters, who specialized in teaching the various combat styles. Each doctore would have been a master of their specific weapon and armor set, passing down the intricate footwork, parries, and strikes that could mean the difference between life and death. A typical day in the ludus began before dawn. The gladiators would rise to a sparse but nutritionally dense diet. Their primary sustenance was often a barley-based gruel fortified with beans and dried fruit. This diet, rich in carbohydrates, earned them the nickname horderii, or barley eaters. While perhaps not the most appetizing, it provided the energy needed for their grueling training. Interestingly, archaeological evidence from gladiator cemeteries, such as the one discovered in Ephesus, suggests that gladiators had higher levels of strontium in their bones, indicating a largely vegetarian diet. This finding challenges the popular image of gladiators as muscular meat-eaters, suggesting instead a diet focused on bulk and energy, rather than lean muscle, perhaps to build a layer of subcutaneous fat that could protect vital organs from shallow cuts. The training itself was relentless. Recruits began with wooden weapons, often heavier than their steel counterparts, to build strength and endurance. They would practice against a palace, a wooden post fixed firmly in the ground, swinging their practice swords and shields, mimicking the movements of combat. Imagine the rhythmic thud of wood against wood, the grunts of exertion, the sharp commands of the doctores echoing through the courtyard. Each blow, each parry, each step was meticulously drilled until it became second nature. They learned not just how to fight, but how to fight in specific styles. A Thraex would learn to wield his curved sickle and small square shield, while a Murmillo would master the straight gladius and large rectangular scutum. These styles were not arbitrary. Right, they were carefully designed to create balanced and exciting matchups in the arena, exploiting the strengths and weaknesses of different weapon and armor combinations. Beyond physical conditioning, gladiators also underwent rigorous mental training. They were taught to face death with courage, to accept their fate, and to fight with honor. The ludus was a microcosm of Roman society's values, emphasizing discipline, bravery, and unwavering resolve. This psychological conditioning was crucial, transforming terrified individuals into men who could, at least outwardly, embrace their violent profession. They were not just fighters, they were performers, and their performance demanded a certain stoicism in the face of mortal danger. The living conditions within the ludus were Spartan. Gladiators typically slept in small, shared cells, often little more than bare rooms with straw mattresses. Hygiene, while important for preventing disease in such close quarters, would have been basic. The sounds of the ludus would have been a constant symphony of clanging steel, shouted commands, the grunts of men in training, and perhaps the mournful cries of those who failed to meet the rigorous standards. Discipline was harsh and immediate. Floggings, solitary confinement, and reduced rations were common punishments for insubordination or poor performance. The lanista held the power of life and death, and while he had a vested interest in keeping his gladiators alive and healthy for the arena, he would not hesitate to enforce his authority with brutal efficiency. Yet amidst this harshness, a strange camaraderie could develop. These men, bound by their shared fate and daily struggle, often formed tight bonds. They were brothers in arms, facing the same dangers, dreaming the same dreams of survival or a glorious end. They might have shared stories of their past lives, whispered hopes for freedom, or simply found solace in each other's presence. Historians still debate the extent of these bonds. Were they truly friendships, or merely alliances born of necessity? It's a mystery lost to time, but the shared experience of the ludus must have forged some undeniable connections. The ludus was not just a training ground, it was also a business. The lanisti were often wealthy entrepreneurs, investing significant sums in acquiring, training, and maintaining their gladiators. A skilled gladiator could fetch a high price, either for a single performance or for sale to another lanista. Some lanisti even leased out their gladiators for private games or provincial spectacles, expanding their reach and their profits. The most famous ludi, like the Ludus Magnus in Rome, were massive complexes, complete with barracks, training arenas, infirmaries, and even baths, reflecting the significant investment and infrastructure required to support the gladiatorial industry. The Ludus Magnus, located just east of the Colosseum, was directly connected to the Amphitheater by an underground tunnel, allowing gladiators direct access to the arena without having to walk through the city streets. Imagine the quiet procession through that tunnel, the anticipation building with every step, the distant roar of the crowd growing louder until it enveloped them entirely. Beyond the daily grind of training, gladiators also had to contend with the constant threat of injury and disease. While they received medical care, often from skilled physicians who specialized in treating gladiatorial wounds, many injuries were severe and potentially life-threatening. A broken bone, a deep cut, or a debilitating infection could end a career or a life just as surely as a sword blow in the arena. The infirmary of a ludus would have been a grim place, filled with the groans of the wounded and the smell of salves and medicinal herbs. The gladiator's life was a paradox, a slave, yet sometimes a celebrity, a condemned man, yet capable of earning immense sums for his owner. They were both despised and admired. The crowds that cheered their victories and demanded their deaths also revered their courage and skill. Some gladiators, through repeated victories, could achieve a form of fame. Their names whispered in the streets, their images depicted on lamps and mosaics. A successful gladiator might even earn his freedom, a rare but coveted prize known as the rudis, a wooden sword signifying his retirement from the arena. This was the ultimate dream for many, a chance to escape the cycle of violence and live out their remaining years in peace, perhaps even becoming a doctore themselves. Yet for the vast majority, the ludus was a stepping stone to a violent end. The average lifespan of a gladiator was short, often no more than a few years in the arena. The statistical odds were stacked against them. Each fight brought them closer to their inevitable demise. Even those who survived many bouts carried the scars, both physical and psychological, of their brutal profession. The weight of knowing that each sunrise might be their last, that each training session was preparing them for a public execution, must have been an unbearable burden. The ludi were not just places of brutal training. They were also places of constant tension and potential rebellion. The most famous example, of course, is the Spartacus Revolt, which began in 73 BCE at a gladiatorial school in Capua. Spartacus, a Thracian gladiator, along with approximately 70 fellow gladiators, broke out of their ludus, seizing kitchen knives and other makeshift weapons. This small act of defiance ignited one of the largest slave uprisings in Roman history, a testament to the simmering resentment and desperation that must have permeated these institutions. The fact that a handful of gladiators could spark such a widespread rebellion speaks volumes about the oppressive conditions they endured and the powerful desire for freedom that lay beneath the surface. The existence of ludi also raises questions about Roman morality and the nature of entertainment. How could a society that prided itself on law and order, on philosophy and art, revel in such brutal spectacles? Some scholars argue that gladiatorial combat served as a stark reminder of Roman power and the consequences of challenging it. Others suggest it was a way for the populace to confront death, to experience vicariously the extremes of human courage and vulnerability. Perhaps it was a release valve for societal tensions, a controlled outlet for violence that might otherwise erupt in other forms. The motivations were likely complex and varied, reflecting the multifaceted nature of Roman society itself. The legacy of the gladiator schools, though grim, is undeniable. They were the crucibles where men were transformed, for better or worse, into the figures that still capture our imaginations today. From the raw recruit to the seasoned veteran, each gladiator's journey through the ludus was a testament to human resilience, desperation, and the enduring power of the will to survive. As the gladiators marched from their cells through the underground tunnels and into the blinding light of the arena, they carried with them the weight of their training, the hopes of their lanista, and the silent prayers of their comrades. The ludus had prepared them for this moment, for the deafening roar of the crowd, for the clash of steel, and for the ultimate test of their courage. As the sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the sand, the roar of the crowd would swell, a living tide of anticipation for the spectacle that was about to unfold. It wasn't just a clash of bodies and wills, but a carefully choreographed dance of distinct archetypes, each with their own strengths, weaknesses, and a unique story told through the gleam of their armor and a flash of their weapons. The arena was a stage, and the gladiators, its tragic, captivating performers. Among the most iconic was the Murmillo, a formidable figure often pitted against the Threx or the Hoplomachus. He was a heavily armed warrior, his head encased in a large, distinctive helmet with a high, fish-crested visor, a design that perhaps gave him his name, derived from mormillos, a type of saltwater fish. This helmet offered excellent protection, though it limited his vision and hearing, forcing him to rely on instinct and the subtle movements of his opponent. His primary weapon was the gladius, a short, thrusting sword, paired with a large, rectangular shield, the scutum, which covered much of his body. The murmillo was a picture of stoic resilience, his movements deliberate and powerful, his defense almost impenetrable. He would advance slowly, shield held high, looking for an opening to deliver a decisive thrust. Imagine the glint of the sun off his bronze helmet, the heavy thud of his shield as he blocked a blow, the sheer physical presence he commanded. In stark contrast stood the retiarius, a gladiator who eschewed heavy armor for speed and agility. He was the only type who fought without a helmet, his face exposed to the roaring crowd, a vulnerable yet defiant image. His equipment was minimal but cunning, a large net, rete, that he would attempt to cast over his opponent, a trident, focina, for thrusting, and a dagger, pugio, for close-quarters combat. His only protection was a large metal shoulder guard, the gallerus, worn on his left arm and shoulder, and a padded arm guard, the manica, on the same arm. The retiarius was a master of evasion, a dancer of death, circling his heavily armored opponent, seeking to entangle them in his net. The tension in the arena would be palpable as he spun and dodged, the crowd holding its breath, waiting for the moment his net flew through the air. If he snared his foe, the trident would follow swiftly, a deadly, precise strike. If he missed, he would have to retrieve his net, a moment of extreme vulnerability, as his opponent, often a secutor, would press the attack. The secutor, or pursuer, was specifically designed to fight the retiarius. His helmet was smooth and rounded, with only 2 small eye holes, to prevent the retiarius's net from catching on any protrusions. This design, while offering excellent protection, also severely restricted his vision and air circulation, making the fight an endurance test in the sweltering heat. He carried a gladius and a scutum, much like the murmillo, but his movements were often more urgent, driven by the need to close the distance and prevent the retiarius from resetting his net. The clash between these two was a classic study in contrasts. The agile, lightly armed hunter against the heavily armored, relentless pursuer. It was a ballet of pursuit and evasion, a dynamic spectacle that often left the crowd breathless. Then there was the Threx, or Thracian, a gladiator whose equipment reflected his supposed ethnic origin, though many were not actually from Thrace. He wore a distinctive helmet with a griffin crest, a symbol associated with Thracian mythology, and carried a small, rectangular shield, the parmula, which allowed for greater mobility than the scutum. His most iconic weapon was the sica, a short, curved sword designed to bypass an opponent's shield and strike at their exposed flanks or back. The Threx was a quick, aggressive fighter, his curved blade a constant threat, his small shield. Used for swift parries and deflections, he would often be pitted against the murmillo or hoplomachus, his speed and unusual weapon creating a challenging matchup against their more conventional styles. Imagine the rapid, almost frantic movements of the Thrax, the flash of his curved blade, the way he would dart in and out seeking an opening. The hoplomachus, whose name means armoured fighter, was another heavily armed gladiator. Often clad in bronze armour and equipped with a small, round shield, the parmula, and a spear, hasta, or a gladius. His helmet was often adorned with a distinctive crest and visor, and he wore greaves on both legs. The hoplomachus was a more static fighter than the Thrax, relying on his heavy armour and the reach of his spear to keep opponents at bay. He was a master of the thrust, using his spear to probe and prod, keeping his adversary at a distance before closing in with his sword if the spear was lost or broken. The hoplomachus was a formidable opponent, a bulwark of bronze and steel, and his clashes with the murmillo or Thrax were often battles of attrition, a test of who could outlast the other. Beyond these more common types, the arena also saw a fascinating array of specialized gladiators, some appearing less frequently, others reserved for particular occasions. The Esidarius, for example, fought from a two-wheeled chariot, a nod to the Celtic charioteers. This was a truly unique spectacle, demanding immense skill from both the gladiator and the horses. Imagine the thunder of hooves, the dust rising, the gladiator standing firm in his chariot, perhaps throwing javelins before dismounting to fight on foot. Historians still debate the exact nature of their combat, whether they fought other Esidaria, or dismounted to face foot soldiers, or perhaps even engaged in mock battles against wild animals. The logistics of such a fight in an arena that might not have been perfectly suited for chariots adds to the mystery and the allure. Then there was the Demacharos, a rare and exotic gladiator who fought with two swords, one in each hand. This style required incredible dexterity and speed, leaving him with less protection but doubling his offensive capabilities. He was often lightly armoured, relying on his dual blades for both offense and defense. The sight of a Demacharos in action must have been breathtaking, a whirlwind of flashing steel, a true master of close-quarters combat. His fights were likely short and brutal, a testament to sheer skill and aggression. The equus, or horseman, began his fight on horseback, armed with a spear and a gladius. He wore a helmet with a visor, but no crest, and a manica on one arm. After an initial skirmish on horseback, he would dismount to continue the fight on foot. This transition added another layer of tactical complexity to the spectacle, showcasing versatility and horsemanship before the final, more conventional duel. The equus was often pitted against another equus, creating a dynamic opening to the combat. The provocator, meaning challenger, was another heavily armored gladiator, often equipped with a gladius, a large rectangular shield, scutum, and a breastplate, cardiophylax, instead of full body armor. His helmet often had a visor but no crest, allowing for better visibility. The provocator was typically paired against another provocator, their duels often being a test of strength and endurance, a classic clash of similar styles. There were also the more obscure types, adding to the rich tapestry of gladiatorial combat. The veles, for instance, was a lightly armed skirmisher, perhaps throwing javelins before closing in with a sword, though their exact equipment and combat style remain somewhat debated by scholars. The lacarius was said to fight with a lasso, a truly unique and challenging weapon to master in the arena, and the Sagittarius, an archer, would have provided a long-range element to the games, though their role was likely more ceremonial or in large-scale mock battles rather than one-on-one duels. Beyond their weaponry and armor, each gladiator type carried a certain mystique, a set of expectations from the crowd. The murmillo was the stoic hero, the retiarius, the cunning underdog, the thraex, the aggressive outsider. These roles, whether consciously crafted or naturally evolved, added to the dramatic narrative of each combat. The choice of pairing was crucial, designed to create the most exciting and unpredictable contests. A clash between a heavily armored murmillo and an agile thraex, for example, offered a stark contrast in styles, a true test of different martial philosophies. The murmillo's strength and defense against the thraex's speed and curved blade. The training for each type was rigorous and specialized, taking place in the ludus, the gladiatorial school, under the watchful eye of the lanista. These men would hone their skills, mastering their specific weapons and learning the intricate dance of their chosen combat style. They would practice with wooden weapons against a palus, a wooden post, endlessly repeating strikes and blocks, building muscle memory and endurance. The lanista understood that while strength and courage were vital, it was the mastery of their specific equipment and the tactical intricacies of their chosen type that would ultimately determine their fate in the arena. The armor itself was a fascinating blend of protection and spectacle. While providing crucial defense against deadly blows, it was also designed to be visually striking, to catch the light and the eye of the crowd. The bronze helmets, often intricately decorated, the gleaming greaves, the polished shields, all contributed to the larger-than-life image of these warriors. Yet this very armor, while protecting them, also burdened them. The weight, the heat, the restricted movement, these were all factors that gladiators had to contend with, adding another layer of challenge to their already perilous existence. The choice of gladiator type was not always a matter of personal preference. Often, it was dictated by the lanista or the editor, the organizer of the games, based on the physical attributes of the recruit, the needs of the ludus, or simply to create interesting pairings for upcoming games. A tall, strong man might be trained as a murmillo, while a smaller, quicker individual might become a thraex or retiarius. This pragmatic approach ensured a diverse roster of fighters, capable of putting on a varied and engaging show for the Roman public. The enduring fascination with gladiators lies not just in the violence of their contests, but in the rich diversity of their combat styles. Each type was a distinct character in a deadly drama, a specialist in a particular art of war. From the stoic power of the murmillo to the elusive grace of the retiarius, from the aggressive thrusts of the thraex to the dual-wielding fury of the Dimachorus, these gladiators offered a panorama of martial prowess. They were living, breathing examples of ancient combat, their struggles on the sand a testament to human courage, skill, and the often brutal demands of Roman entertainment. And as the sun would set, casting long shadows across the empty arena, the echoes of their clashes, their triumphs, and their defeats would linger in the minds of the spectators, a haunting memory of the day's deadly dance. The sun, a fiery orb in the Roman sky, beat down upon the Flavian Amphitheater, its colossal stone curves rising like a man-made mountain from the city's heart. This was the Colosseum, a name that would echo through millennia, a testament to engineering prowess and an insatiable appetite for spectacle. As dawn broke, the air around it would already hum with anticipation, a low thrum that grew steadily into a roar as the hours passed. The scent of dust, sweat, and something indefinable, perhaps the collective breath of 100,000 souls, hung heavy, mingling with the aroma of roasting meats from nearby vendors, and the sweet, cloying perfume of expensive oils worn by the elite. On days of games, Rome was transformed. The streets, usually bustling with merchants, senators, and slaves, would channel a singular torrent of humanity towards this grand arena. Every social stratum was represented, from the emperor and his retinue. Seated in the opulent pulvinar with its gilded trappings and silken cushions, to the senators and equestrians in their designated marble seats, and further still, the plebeians, packed shoulder to shoulder on the wooden benches of the upper tiers. Even women, initially excluded from some public spectacles, found their place in the Colosseum, though usually relegated to the highest, least prestigious seats. The sheer scale of the gathering was staggering. Estimates suggest the Colosseum could hold between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators, a number difficult to comprehend even today. The entrance itself was a ritual. Each ticket, often a pottery shard or a small bone token, specified the porta, gate, cuneus, wedge-shaped section, and gradus, row, a system of crowd control remarkably similar to modern stadiums. As they shuffled through the arched entrances, the murmur of conversation would rise, punctuated by shouts of recognition and the laughter of children. Inside, the sheer immensity of the structure would often elicit gasps. The arena floor, covered in a thick layer of sand, the Latin word arena giving us arena, seemed vast and intimidating, surrounded by the tiered seating that rose steeply, creating a bowl that concentrated sound and sight. Before the main events, there were often preliminary displays designed to warm up the crowd. These might include exotic animal parades with creatures from the far-flung corners of the empire, lions from Africa, bears from Germania, even elephants, led around the arena, their roars and trumpeting adding to the sensory overload. Sometimes animal hunts, venationes, would take place, where trained hunters or condemned criminals would face off against wild beasts. These were not always fair fights. Often, the animals were starved or provoked, their natural ferocity magnified for the crowd's entertainment. The spectacle of man against beast, a primal dance of survival, resonated deeply with the Roman psyche, symbolizing their dominion over nature and the wild. But the true heart of the games, the event everyone had come to see, was the gladiatorial combat. The gladiators themselves were a complex and often contradictory class. They were, in essence, entertainers, yet their lives hung by a thread with each performance. Many were slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals, forced into this brutal profession. Yet some were free men, driven by debt, a thirst for glory, or simply the allure of a life that, though short, could be intensely vibrant and potentially lucrative. A successful gladiator could earn considerable wealth, even renown, becoming a celebrity whose image adorned lamps, mosaics, and even children's toys. The training of a gladiator was rigorous and brutal, conducted in specialized schools, ludi gladiatori, under the watchful eye of a lanista. These schools were essentially military barracks, where men were drilled in various fighting styles, weapon handling, and physical conditioning. They learned to fight with a range of weapons, the scutum, large rectangular shield, and gladius, short sword of the mirmillo, the net and trident of the retierus, the small round shield and curved sword of the thrakes. Each gladiator type was designed to be distinct, offering a variety of combat styles to keep the audience engaged. The training was not just about killing, but about fighting with skill, courage, and a certain theatrical flair. A gladiator's life was about performing, about embodying the ideals of Roman masculinity and martial prowess. The procession into the arena, the pompa, was a moment of immense drama. Accompanied by trumpets and drums, the gladiators would march in their finest armor, helmets gleaming, plumes swaying. They would parade before the emperor and the assembled crowd, often shouting the chilling salute, Ave Imperator, morituri te salutant. Hail, Emperor, those who are about to die salute you. This declaration, though famously associated with gladiators, is actually only reliably recorded once by the historian Suetonius, referring to a naval battle staged on a lake, not regular gladiatorial contests. Nevertheless, it captures the essence of their grim duty. The fights themselves were carefully orchestrated. Gladiators were typically matched against opponents of a different fighting style, ensuring a dynamic and unpredictable contest. For example, a heavily armed mirmillo might face a lightly armored retierus, whose agility and net offered a different kind of challenge. The combat was fierce, often bloody, but not necessarily a fight to the death. While some contests were indeed mortal, many were simply to first blood or submission. The goal was to entertain, and a skilled gladiator who fought bravely, even if defeated, might be spared by the crowd's acclamation or the emperor's mercy. The crowd's role in these decisions was pivotal. They would shout their approval or disapproval, waving handkerchiefs or turning their thumbs. The famous thumbs up or thumbs down gesture, however, is a subject of scholarly debate. Historians still disagree whether a thumb pointed up meant live and down meant die, or if the gestures were more nuanced. Some argue that a thumb pointed up towards the throat signified death, while a thumb tucked in, representing a sheathed sword, meant mercy. Regardless of the precise gesture, the crowd's collective will held immense sway over the fate of a defeated gladiator. The emperor, though having the final say, often deferred to the popular sentiment, understanding the importance of maintaining public favor. The psychology of the crowd was a fascinating study. They came not just for the violence, but for the drama, the heroism, the spectacle of human endurance. They identified with the gladiators, seeing in their struggles a reflection of their own lives, albeit in a magnified, brutal form. The games offered an escape from the mundane, a chance to witness extreme emotions and fates played out in real time. There was a sense of communion, of shared experience, as tens of thousands of people collectively held their breath, cheered or groaned. The roar of the crowd, a primal sound that echoed off the stone walls, was an integral part of the experience, a powerful expression of collective emotion. For the gladiators, the experience was profoundly different. They were the focus of this intense gaze, their every move scrutinized. Fear, adrenaline, and the primal instinct to survive would have coursed through them. Yet, there was also the potential for glory, for a momentary taste of freedom, or at least a reprieve from their enslaved status. A gladiator who survived many fights could eventually earn his freedom, symbolized by the wooden sword, rudis, presented to him. This was a rare but powerful incentive, a beacon of hope in a life fraught with peril. Beyond the main gladiatorial contests, the Colosseum also hosted other forms of entertainment. Mock naval battles, naumac. Hiai was staged by flooding the arena floor, though this was a complex and infrequent undertaking, more often performed in purpose-built basins. Reenactments of famous battles, often featuring hundreds of participants, brought history to life in a visceral way. The sheer logistical effort required to stage these events, from moving animals and props to managing vast numbers of combatants, speaks to the incredible organizational capabilities of the Roman state. The games were not just entertainment. They were deeply intertwined with Roman society, politics, and religion. They served as a powerful tool for emperors and politicians to curry favor with the populace, to demonstrate their generosity and power. A successful series of games could solidify an emperor's popularity, while a poorly managed one could invite public discontent. The games also reinforced Roman values: courage, discipline, endurance, and the willingness to face death with dignity. They were a vivid, often brutal, reminder of the empire's might and its ability to command both human and animal resources on an unprecedented scale. The Colosseum itself was a marvel of engineering, built largely of concrete and stone. Its intricate system of ramps, elevators, and trapdoors allowed for the swift introduction of animals, scenery, and gladiators onto the arena floor. Below the arena, a vast network of subterranean passages, the Hypogeum, housed animals, props, and the machinery needed to operate the elaborate stage effects. Imagine the bustling activity below ground, the creaking of winches, the low growls of caged beasts, the hurried whispers of stage hands, all hidden from the roaring crowd above, yet essential to the seamless flow of the spectacle. Perhaps these walls whispered stories to the stars, tales of courage and despair, of lives lived and lost for the fleeting pleasure of a crowd. The legacy of the gladiatorial games is complex. They represent a darker side of Roman civilization, a stark reminder of the brutality that could coexist with sophisticated culture and law. Yet they also speak to the human fascination with spectacle, with heroism, and with the ultimate stakes of life and death. For centuries, the Colosseum stood as the epicenter of this drama, its stones absorbing the cheers, the gasps and the silence of countless generations. Even after the games ceased in the 5th century AD, the Colosseum remained a silent sentinel, its ruined arches still evoking the grandeur and the grim reality of ancient Rome's most enduring spectacle. The last recorded gladiatorial games in Rome took place around 404 AD, largely due to the growing influence of Christianity. which condemned the bloody spectacles. However, animal hunts continued for a few more decades. The sheer scale of death involved in these games is difficult to quantify, but it was undoubtedly immense. Not just gladiators, but countless animals perished in the arena. The games were a massive drain on resources, both human and natural, yet they persisted for centuries, a testament to their deep cultural significance. The fascination with gladiators continues to this day, their image enduring in popular culture. A symbol of strength, sacrifice, and the eternal human struggle. The Colosseum, though scarred by time and earthquake, still stands, a powerful, silent witness to a world that once reveled in the brutal beauty of the arena. Its very presence reminds us of the profound human capacity for both creation and destruction, for both awe-inspiring artistry and chilling cruelty, all contained within its magnificent, crumbling walls. The Republic, with its rough-and-tumble spirit, had laid the groundwork, but it was the Empire that truly elevated the gladiatorial games to an art form of both spectacle and political theatre. As the Caesars ascended to power, consolidating vast territories and diverse peoples under a single, formidable rule, the games transformed from a somewhat localized tradition into a cornerstone of imperial propaganda. They became a meticulously orchestrated display of Rome's might, its generosity, and its absolute control. Augustus, the first Roman emperor, understood this power implicitly. He was a master of public relations, and his reign, beginning in 27 BCE, saw an unprecedented expansion of the games. He didn't just tolerate them, he actively embraced and regulated them, ensuring they served his vision of a stable, prosperous Rome. He boasted in his Res Gestae Divi Augusti, a monumental inscription detailing his accomplishments, that he had given gladiatorial shows on 8 occasions, involving approximately 10,000 men. This wasn't just a casual mention. It was a proud declaration, a testament to his beneficence and his ability to provide for the Roman people. Imagine the sheer logistics of such an undertaking. The recruitment, the training, the feeding, the housing, the transport of so many combatants, not to mention the wild animals, the elaborate sets, and the countless spectators. It speaks to an organizational capacity that was truly astonishing for its time. Under Augustus and his successors, the games became less about private funerary rites and more about public affirmation of imperial authority. An emperor's ability to stage magnificent games was a direct reflection of his wealth, his power, and his commitment to the Roman populace. These were not mere entertainments. They were carefully crafted political statements. The emperor, seated in his imperial box, often surrounded by his family and high-ranking officials, was the focal point. His presence legitimized the spectacle, and his gestures, a thumbs up or thumbs down, could decide a man's fate, making him a visible arbiter of life and death. Almost a living god in the arena. The Colosseum, or the Flavian Amphitheater as it was originally known, stands as the most enduring symbol of this imperial era of games. Commissioned by Emperor Vespasian in 70 CE and completed by his son Titus in 80 CE, it was a marvel of engineering and architecture, capable of seating an estimated 50,000 to 80,000 spectators. Its sheer scale dwarfed any previous amphitheater, a testament to the Flavian dynasty's desire to solidify their rule after the turbulent years following Nero's death. The Colosseum wasn't just a venue, it was a statement etched in stone, a colossal monument to Roman ingenuity and imperial power. Imagine its inauguration, 100 days of games, as recorded by the historian Cassius Dio, featuring gladiatorial contests, animal hunts, and even naval battles staged by flooding the arena floor. The roar of the crowd, the glint of sun on polished bronze, the scent of dust and blood and exotic animals. It must have been an overwhelming sensory experience, a spectacle designed to awe and subdue. The variety of gladiators also expanded significantly during this period. While the basic types, like the murmillo and thraex, remained popular, new categories emerged, often reflecting Rome's expanding empire and its encounters with diverse cultures. We see the retiarius, with his net and trident, a nimble fighter who relied on speed and evasion. There were also the essedari, who fought from chariots, mimicking Celtic warfare, and even female gladiators, known as gladiatrices, though their appearances were rare and often considered a novelty, sometimes even scandalous. The existence of female gladiators is a fascinating, if debated, detail. While certainly not commonplace, inscriptions and historical accounts, such as those from Cassius Dio and Tacitus, confirm their presence. Presence in the arena, particularly during the reigns of Nero and Domitian. They challenged traditional Roman gender roles, and their participation often drew both fascination and disapproval, highlighting the complex social dynamics at play within the spectacle. The games were also an essential tool for social control. By providing regular, lavish entertainment, the emperors kept the populace content and distracted from political grievances or economic hardships. The phrase, bread and circuses, panem et circenses, coined by the satirist Juvenal, perfectly encapsulates this strategy. Free grain distributions provided sustenance, while the games offered an escape, a communal experience that fostered a sense of shared Roman identity, even if it was built upon the suffering of others. The emperor was the benevolent provider, the patron who cared for his people, and the games were his most visible demonstration of this care. Beyond the grand spectacles in Rome, gladiatorial games flourished throughout the empire. Every major Roman city, from Pompeii to Leptis Magna, boasted its own amphitheater, a testament to the pervasive popularity of the games. These local games, often sponsored by wealthy citizens or provincial governors, mirrored the imperial shows on a smaller scale, reinforcing Roman culture and authority in distant lands. A new amphitheater was often one of the first major public works undertaken in a newly conquered territory, a clear symbol of Romanization. Yet despite their popularity, the games were not without their critics. Philosophers like Seneca, writing in the 1st century CE, expressed disgust at the cruelty and bloodlust, particularly during the noonday executions where unarmed criminals were thrown to wild beasts. He famously wrote, "I come home more greedy, more ambitious, more voluptuous, and even more cruel and inhuman, because I have been among human beings." His words offer a rare glimpse into a dissenting voice, reminding us that not all Romans embraced the spectacle with unbridled enthusiasm. However, such criticisms were often overshadowed by the overwhelming public demand for the games. The training of gladiators continued in specialized schools, or ludi, which became more professional and regimented under imperial rule. These ludi were often harsh, almost like military barracks, but they also offered a path, however slim, to fame and fortune for those who survived. Gladiators were valuable commodities, and their owners, the laniste, invested heavily in their training, diet, and medical care. The skilled gladiator could command high prices, and a popular champion could become a celebrity, his image appearing on lamps, mosaics, and even graffiti. Imagine the thrill of seeing your favorite gladiator's name scrawled on a wall, a testament to his prowess and your admiration. The life of a gladiator was a brutal paradox. They were slaves, often condemned criminals or prisoners of war. Yet they were also highly trained athletes, celebrated heroes, and sex symbols. Their bodies, honed by rigorous training, were admired, and their courage in the face of death was revered. We have records of gladiators who achieved immense popularity, like Flamma, a Syrian gladiator who fought 34 times, winning 21, drawing 9, and losing only 4. He was offered freedom 4 times, but chose to remain a gladiator, perhaps addicted to the roar of the crowd, the thrill of combat, or the unique status it afforded him. His story, pieced together from tomb inscriptions, hints at the complex psychology of these men and the allure of a life that, despite its inherent dangers, offered a kind of glory otherwise unattainable. The lavishness of the games reached its zenith under emperors like Domitian and Trajan. Domitian, known for his autocratic rule, was a keen patron of the games, introducing new types of contests and even staging nocturnal battles under torchlight. Trajan, celebrated for his military conquests, marked his Dacian triumph in 107 CE with games that lasted for 123 days, involving 10,000 gladiators and 11,000 animals. This truly staggering event, recorded by Cassius Dio, speaks to the immense resources the empire could command and the insatiable appetite of the Roman populace for spectacle. To put this into perspective, 10,000 gladiators would be roughly equivalent to the entire standing army of a medium-sized modern nation. The sheer scale is almost unfathomable. However, the question of how many gladiators actually died in the arena is a subject of scholarly debate. While popular imagination often paints a picture of constant, bloody slaughter, historical evidence suggests that not every fight ended in death. Gladiators were expensive to train and maintain, and their owners had a vested interest in keeping them alive. Many fights were probably more akin to modern wrestling or boxing matches, ending with a surrender or a knockout, with the crowd or the emperor deciding the loser's fate. Of course, death was always a possibility, and certainly many met their end in the arena, particularly those who were less skilled or those condemned to fight to the death as punishment. But the image of every single fight being a fight to the death is likely an exaggeration. Historians still debate the precise mortality rates, with estimates ranging from as low as 10 to 20% per fight to much higher figures for certain types of contests or for condemned criminals. The games were also deeply intertwined with Roman religious beliefs. While the funerary origins faded, the games retained a certain sacral quality. They were often held on religious holidays or dedicated to specific deities. The rituals surrounding the games, from the grand procession, pompa, before the contests, to the sacrifices offered, imbued them with a sense of solemnity and connection to the divine. The arena, in a way, became a sacred space where the boundaries between life and death, human and animal, were dramatically played out before the gods and men, as the empire continued to expand and mature. The games evolved further. The venationes, or wild beast hunts, grew in popularity, showcasing exotic animals from the far reaches of the empire, lions from Africa, bears from Europe, even crocodiles and elephants. These hunts were not just about killing. They were elaborate displays of Roman power over nature, a symbolic taming of the wild world. Imagine the spectacle of a dozen lions being released into the arena, their roars echoing off the tiers of seats, as skilled hunters, often venatores rather than gladiators, confronted them. The scent of fear, the thrill of the chase, the raw power of the animals. It must have been an intoxicating mix. The impact of the gladiatorial games on Roman society was profound and multifaceted. They shaped public spaces, influenced art and literature, and provided a unique lens through which to understand Roman values of courage, discipline, and honor, even if these values were often twisted and perverted by the spectacle of violence. The arena was a microcosm of Rome itself, a place of strict hierarchy, brutal competition, and dazzling display, all under the watchful eye of the emperor. Yet even at their peak, the seeds of their decline were being sown. The rise of Christianity, with its emphasis on the sanctity of human life, gradually began to challenge the moral foundations of the games. Early Christian writers condemned the bloodshed and cruelty, viewing them as pagan abominations. While it would take centuries for these moral objections to gain widespread traction, they represented a growing counter-narrative to the pervasive popularity of the games. The Imperial era of gladiatorial games, spanning roughly from Augustus to the 4th century CE, represents the zenith of their influence and spectacle. They were more than just entertainment. They were a vital artery in the circulatory system of the Roman Empire, pumping propaganda, social control, and a shared cultural experience into every corner of its vast dominion. For centuries, the roar of the crowd, the clash of steel, and the spectacle of life and death echoed through the amphitheaters of the Roman world, a powerful testament to an empire that understood the profound impact of public display. These arenas, now often crumbling ruins, still whisper stories of those days, of emperors and gladiators, of cheers and gasps, and of a civilization that built its legacy, in part, on the grand, brutal theatre of human combat. As Rome's legions marched, so too did her culture, her laws, and her spectacles. The thunderous roar of the Colosseum, once a uniquely Roman sound, began to echo in distant lands, carried on the winds of conquest and assimilation. Gladiatorial contests, far from remaining confined to the city on the Tiber, spread like an intricate mosaic across the vast tapestry of the Roman Empire, adapting to local customs and leaving an indelible mark on provinces from Britannia to Syria. The arenas themselves mirrored this expansion. While the Colosseum remained the grandest, hundreds of smaller amphitheaters, some carved into hillsides, others meticulously constructed from local stone, sprang up across the empire. In places like Pula, on the Istrian Peninsula, a magnificent amphitheater still stands, its towering arches a testament to Roman engineering and the enduring appeal of the games. Built in the 1st century CE, it could seat over 20,000 spectators, a significant portion of the local population, and its presence speaks volumes about the widespread adoption of gladiatorial culture. Similarly, the amphitheater at El Jem in modern-day Tunisia, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, rivals the Colosseum in its scale and preservation, capable of holding 35,000 people. These provincial arenas weren't merely imitations. They were vibrant centers of local life, where Roman identity was both asserted and negotiated. The appeal of the games in the provinces was multifaceted. For some, it was a display of Roman power and sophistication, a demonstration of imperial might and the benefits of Romanization. For others, particularly the elites, sponsoring games was a path to prestige and political influence, a way to curry favor with both the local populace and the Roman administration, a wealthy provincial citizen eager to climb the social ladder might fund a series of gladiatorial shows, offering lavish prizes and banquets, thereby solidifying their standing within the community. Inscriptions found across the empire often commemorate these benefactors, proudly detailing their contributions to public spectacles. The types of gladiators and the nature of the contests also sometimes subtly shifted in the provinces. While the classic Roman gladiator types, the Murmillo, the Thrax, the Retiarius, were ubiquitous, local fighting traditions or preferences might occasionally influence the presentation. For instance, in some eastern provinces, where Greek athletic traditions were strong, there might have been a greater emphasis on single combat or less heavily armored fighters, perhaps reflecting a lingering appreciation for the agility and skill of the gymnasium. However, for the most part, the Roman model prevailed, a testament to its powerful cultural pull. One fascinating aspect of provincial gladiatorial culture was the degree to which it integrated with existing local religious practices or festivals. While the games were primarily secular entertainment, their origins were rooted in funerary rites. In some areas, particularly in the Celtic regions of Gaul and Britannia, there's evidence to suggest that gladiatorial contests might have been incorporated into local religious observances, or at least performed in conjunction with them. Imagine, if you will, a local chieftain, newly Romanized, offering games as part of a traditional harvest festival, blending the old gods with the new spectacles. This blending of cultures, a hallmark of Roman provincial administration, allowed for a smoother transition and greater acceptance of Roman customs. However, the spread of gladiatorial games was not always met with universal enthusiasm. In some regions, particularly those with strong existing cultural identities, there was resistance, or at least a slower adoption. The Jewish population, for example, largely viewed the games with disdain, considering them a pagan and barbaric practice. The historian Josephus records instances of Jewish opposition to Roman spectacles, including gladiatorial contests, viewing them as an affront to their religious beliefs. This cultural clash highlights the limits of Romanization and the enduring strength of local traditions. Yet for many, the games offered a thrilling escape, a communal experience that transcended social strata. From the humblest farmer to the wealthiest merchant, all could gather in the amphitheater, united by the shared anticipation of blood and spectacle. The roar of the crowd, the clash of steel, the desperate struggle for survival. These were universal emotions that resonated deeply, regardless of one's origin. The gladiatorial schools, or ludi, also spread beyond Rome, though perhaps not with the same density. Major provincial capitals would often have their own training facilities, where recruits, whether slaves, criminals, or free volunteers, would be honed into fighting machines. These ludi would supply gladiators for local games, and sometimes even send their best fighters to compete in larger arenas, perhaps even dreaming of the ultimate glory of the Colosseum itself. The discovery of gladiatorial barracks, complete with training grounds and cells, at sites like Carnuntum in Austria, provides a tangible link to these provincial training centres, offering a glimpse into the daily lives of gladiators far from the heart of the empire. One lesser-known detail about provincial gladiators concerns the prevalence of female gladiators, or gladiatrices. While rare and often considered a novelty even in Rome, there is archaeological evidence suggesting their presence in the provinces. A relief from Halicarnassus, modern-day Bodrum, Turkey, depicts two female gladiators, Amazon and Achillea, in what appears to be a missio, or honourable discharge, suggesting they fought to a draw. This discovery, dated to the 1st or 2nd century CE, hints that the spectacle of women fighting, while controversial, was not entirely confined to the capital and found an audience even in the distant reaches of the empire. It reminds us that the Roman world was far more complex and varied than a singular narrative might suggest. The logistics of staging gladiatorial games in the provinces were immense. Wild animals for the Venationes had to be transported, sometimes over vast distances from the far corners of the empire. Lions from Africa, bears from the European forests, even crocodiles from the Nile, all were brought to provincial arenas to face skilled bestiari. This intricate network of supply and demand speaks to the organizational prowess of the Roman state and the dedication of local magistrates to provide these exotic spectacles. Imagine the sight of a caged lion being paraded through a quiet provincial town, a stark reminder of the empire's reach and its insatiable appetite for entertainment. Beyond the grandeur, the games also served a more insidious purpose in the provinces, as a tool of social control. By providing regular, thrilling entertainment, the Roman authorities could distract the populace from potential unrest or political grievances. The shared experience of the games, the collective emotional release, could foster a sense of unity, albeit a superficial one, between the ruling class and the common people. It was a powerful instrument of pacification, ensuring that the energies of the masses were directed towards the arena rather than towards rebellion. Historians still debate the precise degree to which gladiatorial games genuinely fostered Roman identity versus merely coexisting with local cultures. Was it a true assimilation, where provincial peoples genuinely embraced Roman values, or was it a more pragmatic adoption, where they participated in the games out of necessity, curiosity, or simply because they were the most exciting thing happening in town? The answer likely lies somewhere in between, varying greatly from one province to another, and even from one individual to the next. In some areas, Romanization was deep and pervasive, while in others, it remained a thin veneer over ancient traditions. The decline of gladiatorial games in the provinces largely mirrored their decline in Rome itself. The rise of Christianity, with its strong condemnation of the games as pagan and immoral, played a significant role. As the empire gradually adopted Christianity as its official religion, the pressure to abolish these spectacles grew. Emperors like Constantine and Honorius issued edicts against gladiatorial combat in the 4th and 5th centuries CE, though enforcement was often slow and inconsistent, particularly in the more remote provinces. The deep-seated popularity of the games meant they often lingered in various forms long after official prohibitions. However, it was not just religious opposition that led to their demise. Economic decline, political instability, and the gradual fragmentation of the Western Roman Empire also contributed. The vast resources required to stage elaborate games became increasingly difficult to procure. The logistical networks that brought exotic animals and skilled fighters to distant arenas began to unravel. As the empire weakened, so too did its ability to maintain such lavish spectacles. Yet, even as the gladiatorial arenas fell silent, their echoes lingered. The architectural remains of amphitheaters across the former empire stand as enduring monuments to a bygone era. They whisper stories of roaring crowds, clashing steel, and the desperate struggles of men and women fighting for their lives. In places like Leptis Magna in Libya or Chester in England, the ghostly outlines of these arenas still evoke a sense of the drama that once unfolded within their walls. The legacy of gladiatorial games in the provinces is a complex one, a testament to the enduring power of spectacle and the intricate interplay between conqueror, and conquered. It shows us how a cultural phenomenon born in the heart of an empire could spread its tendrils far and wide, adapting, influencing, and ultimately fading, leaving behind a rich archaeological and historical record. These provincial arenas were not just places of entertainment. They were crucibles where Roman identity was forged, challenged, and ultimately transformed. They remind us that history is not a monolithic entity, but a vibrant, ever-changing narrative, shaped by countless local stories and individual experiences. And as the sun set on the Roman Empire, it also set on the era of the gladiators, leaving behind only the silent stones and the whispers of a forgotten roar. As the dust settled from the more conventional gladiatorial contests, the roar of the crowd often shifted, anticipating a different kind of spectacle, one that broadened the very definition of combat in the Roman arena. The games, after all, were not solely about men fighting men. They encompassed a far wider array of performers and a more diverse range of deadly encounters, reflecting the vastness and complexity of the Roman world itself. Among the most intriguing and, for a long time, historically debated figures were the gladiatrices, the female gladiators. For centuries, modern historians often dismissed their existence as rare anomalies or exaggerated tales. Yet, archaeological discoveries and literary references have gradually painted a clearer, if still somewhat shadowy, picture. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence comes from a relief found in Halicarnassus, dating to the 1st or 2nd century CE, depicting two female gladiators, Amazon and Achillea, locked in combat. Their names, evocative of mythical warrior women, suggest a deliberate theatricality to their bouts, perhaps even a sense of exoticism designed to captivate the Roman imagination. The inscription notes that they fought to a stans missio, a draw, implying a level of skill and courage that earned them respect, rather than simply being novelty acts. These women, much like their male counterparts, were likely drawn from the margins of society, slaves, freedwomen, or perhaps even women from higher social strata, who, for reasons we can only speculate about, debt, a thirst for fame, or a desperate need for income, chose this perilous path. The Roman satirist Juvenal, writing in the late 1st and early 2nd century CE, famously derided aristocratic women who trained in the arena, seeing it as a scandalous departure from traditional Roman female virtues. His scorn, however, inadvertently confirms their presence, suggesting that female gladiators were not always relegated to the lowest echelons. Imagine the scene. A woman, perhaps clad in a loincloth and armed with a shield and sword, stepping onto the sand, the sun glinting off her bronze helmet, the gasps of the crowd, the murmurs of disapproval from some, the eager anticipation from others. It must have been a truly arresting sight, a challenge to the deeply ingrained gender roles of Roman society. While never as numerous or as common as male gladiators, the existence of gladiatrices speaks volumes about the Roman appetite for spectacle and their willingness to transgress social norms for entertainment. Emperor Septimius Severus, in 200 CE, eventually banned women from fighting in the arena, citing concerns about public morality. This ban, however, came centuries after their initial appearance, indicating a period where their presence, while perhaps controversial, was tolerated and even celebrated. Historians still debate the precise social status of these women and the extent of their participation. Were they primarily entertainers in private games, or did they regularly feature in major public spectacles? The evidence is fragmented, leaving much to the imagination, but the echoes of their courage resonate through time, a testament to those who defied expectations in the brutal theatre of the arena. Beyond the human combatants, the Roman games were also renowned for their venationes, the spectacular beast hunts that often preceded the gladiatorial contests. These events were a visceral display of Roman power and dominion over the natural world. A way to bring the exotic and dangerous creatures from the far-flung corners of the empire directly into the heart of Rome. The logistical challenges alone were immense. Imagine the colossal undertaking of capturing, transporting, and housing hundreds, sometimes thousands, of wild animals from Africa, Asia, and Europe. Lions from North Africa, tigers from India, elephants, bears, leopards, wild boars, and even crocodiles were all paraded and pitted against each other. Or against specially trained hunters called venatores or bestiari. The venatores were not merely chaotic slaughter. They were often carefully choreographed spectacles, designed to showcase the bravery of the hunters and the ferocity of the beasts. Arenas were sometimes elaborately decorated to resemble natural habitats, with trees, rocks, and artificial hills, creating a more immersive experience for the audience. The venatores, often lightly armoured and armed with spears or bows, displayed remarkable agility and skill in facing these formidable creatures. They were not always common criminals or slaves. Some were professional hunters, highly trained and renowned for their prowess. A mosaic from the Villa Borghese in Rome, dating to the 4th century CE, depicts various venatores engaged in elaborate hunts, showcasing their specialized weapons and tactics. One particularly striking detail, often overlooked, is the use of dogs in these hunts, not just as companions, but as active participants, trained to corner and distract the larger beasts, adding another layer of complexity to the deadly ballet. The sheer scale of these hunts could be staggering. Emperor Pompey the Great, in 55 BCE, reportedly presented 500 lions and 20 elephants in a single series of games. Emperor Trajan, celebrating his Dacian victories in the early 2nd century CE, is said to have orchestrated games lasting 123 days, during which 11,000 animals were killed. These numbers, while perhaps exaggerated by ancient chroniclers, underscore the Romans' insatiable demand for grand, often brutal entertainment. The venatores served multiple purposes. They demonstrated Rome's wealth and control over its vast empire, provided thrilling entertainment, and offered a symbolic subjugation of nature to human will. The sight of a majestic lion falling to a human spear, or an elephant trumpeting in distress before collapsing, was a potent visual metaphor for Roman might. Beyond the venatores and gladiatorial duels, the arena also served as a stage for other, often more gruesome forms of public combat and execution. These spectacles were intended to reinforce social order, deter crime, and provide a cathartic release for the masses. One common form of execution was damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. This was a particularly horrific fate, where condemned criminals, often stripped naked and unarmed, were thrown into the arena to be torn apart by wild animals. The spectacle was designed to be a terrifying deterrent, a public demonstration of the consequences of defying Roman law. Early Christians, persecuted for their refusal to worship the Roman gods, were frequently subjected to this fate, becoming martyrs in the eyes of their fellow believers. The accounts of these executions, though often embellished, speak to the chilling reality of Roman justice. Another form of public combat involved mock naval battles, or naumachia. While not strictly combatants in the gladiatorial sense, these elaborate spectacles were immense undertakings, requiring the flooding of arenas or the construction of artificial lakes. Emperor Claudius, in 52 CE, staged a naumachia on the Fucine Lake involving 19,000 condemned criminals who fought to the death on ships in a recreation of a historical naval battle. The sounds of oars churning, the clash of swords, the cries of men, and the spray of water must have created an overwhelming sensory experience, a truly immersive form of historical reenactment, albeit with real blood. These events were incredibly expensive and logistically complex, reserved for the most significant occasions and the wealthiest emperors, highlighting the Roman penchant for grand, almost theatrical displays of power and violence. The arena also hosted other, less formal, but equally dangerous contests. Sometimes dwarves or physically disabled individuals were pitted against each other or against animals for the amusement of the crowd. These spectacles, while disturbing to modern sensibilities, were part of the broader tapestry of Roman entertainment, reflecting a society that often found amusement in the misfortunes and differences of others. There were also instances of poena culiae, the punishment of the sack, where parricides were sewn into a leather sack with a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster, and then thrown into water. While not strictly an arena event, it illustrates the Roman capacity for inventive and cruel forms of public justice. The diverse array of combatants and spectacles in the Roman arena underscores its central role in Roman society. It was a place where boundaries blurred, where the exotic met the familiar, where justice was dispensed, and where entertainment reached its most extreme forms. The roar of the crowd, the scent of blood and sweat, the shimmer of sunlight on polished armor, the terrified trumpeting of an elephant, the defiant last stand of a condemned man. All these elements combined to create an experience unlike any other. The arena was a microcosm of the empire itself, vast, powerful, often brutal, and endlessly fascinating. It reflected Rome's mastery over its subjects, its animals, and even, in a twisted way, its own citizens. The legacy of these diverse spectacles is complex. On one hand, they represent a darker side of human history, a testament to the capacity for cruelty and the objectification of life for entertainment. On the other hand, they offer invaluable insights into Roman culture, their values, their social structures, and their relationship with the natural world. They tell us about their engineering prowess, their logistical capabilities, and their unyielding demand for ever more elaborate and thrilling forms of public display. The remains of the Colosseum and other amphitheaters across the Roman world stand as silent witnesses to these events, their weathered stones still whispering tales of gladiatrices, venatores, and the countless lives that were offered up for the enjoyment of the Roman people. As we move forward, the focus shifts slightly from the spectacles themselves to the infrastructure that made them possible, and the lives of those who were integral to the smooth functioning of the games, yet rarely stepped into the spotlight. The gladiators and beasts were the stars, but behind the scenes, a vast network of individuals, trainers, doctors, armorers, animal handlers, and even the architects and engineers worked tirelessly to bring these elaborate fantasies to life. Their stories, often overlooked, are just as crucial to understanding the full scope of the Roman games. As the centuries turned, the roar of the Colosseum, though still mighty, began to echo with a subtly different tone. The vibrant, often brutal spectacle of gladiatorial combat, which had for so long been woven into the very fabric of Roman life, found itself increasingly challenged by forces both internal and external. The empire itself, vast and unwieldy, was beginning to creak under its own weight, and the economic prosperity that had fueled such lavish displays was no longer a given. The 3rd century CE, in particular, was a tumultuous period for Rome. A succession of emperors, many of whom met violent ends, plunged the empire into an era of political instability and economic hardship. This constant state of flux had a direct impact on the games. Maintaining a steady supply of gladiators, whether slaves, condemned criminals, or even volunteers, required significant resources, from their training and feeding to the elaborate arenas and the exotic beasts often featured in the Venationes. As imperial coffers dwindled and the focus shifted to defending vast borders from barbarian incursions, the sheer scale and frequency of the games began to diminish. Local magistrates and wealthy citizens, who once vied to sponsor the most spectacular shows for public favour, found themselves with less disposable income and, perhaps, a growing sense of pragmatism. Why spend a fortune on a single day's entertainment when the city walls needed repair or the legions demanded more pay? Beyond these practical considerations, a more profound shift was occurring in the Roman psyche, a slow but steady evolution of social values. While the thrill of combat remained, the unbridled enthusiasm for bloodshed began to wane in some quarters. Seneca the Younger, writing in the 1st century CE, had already expressed a certain weariness with the gratuitous violence, describing a midday spectacle where men were simply slaughtered for the crowd's amusement as pure murder. Though Seneca's philosophical views were not widely embraced by the masses, his sentiments represented a nascent thread of dissent that would only grow stronger over time. It was into this evolving landscape that Christianity, once a persecuted sect, began to rise as a powerful, organized force within the empire. Early Christians viewed gladiatorial games with profound moral revulsion. Their core tenets of love, compassion, and the sanctity of human life stood in stark contrast to the spectacles of death and suffering that defined the arena. For them, the games were not merely entertainment. They were a manifestation of pagan idolatry, a celebration of violence that directly contradicted the teachings of Christ. Tertullian, a prolific Christian writer from Carthage in the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries, was one of the most vocal critics. In his treatise De Spectaculis on the games, he systematically condemned all forms of public entertainment, but reserved particular scorn for the gladiatorial contests. He argued that they were a form of murder, a direct affront to God's creation, and that Christians should actively shun them. He questioned how a believer could witness such brutality and then, with hands still stained by the spectacle, partake in the Eucharist. His writings, though fiery and polemical, helped to solidify Christian opposition and provided a theological framework for their stance. The rise of Christianity from a small, often clandestine group to a dominant religion was a gradual process, but by the 4th century, it had gained significant imperial favor. Emperor Constantine's conversion in the early 4th century, culminating in the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, which granted religious tolerance, marked a pivotal turning point. Suddenly, Christians were no longer an oppressed minority, but a powerful and influential segment of society, whose moral objections carried increasing weight. Constantine himself, though a complex figure who continued to use pagan symbols, ells and practices, made some early attempts to curb gladiatorial contests. In 325 CE, he issued an edict that prohibited gladiatorial games in the East, citing the need to prevent bloody spectacles in time of civil peace. However, this prohibition was often honored more in the breach than in the observance, especially in the western parts of the empire, where the traditions were more deeply entrenched. The games were not easily extinguished by imperial decree alone, particularly when they still held sway over the popular imagination. Despite these early attempts at prohibition, the games continued, albeit with declining frequency and grandeur. The economic downturn meant fewer resources for training and equipping gladiators, and the changing social climate meant fewer volunteers. The pool of condemned criminals and slaves, while still a source, was also subject to various pressures. Historians still debate the precise impact of Christian opposition on the decline of the games. Was it the primary cause, or merely a contributing factor alongside economic woes and shifting social tastes? It's likely a combination of all three. The moral arguments of Christian leaders undoubtedly influenced public opinion, particularly among the growing Christian population. As more Romans converted, the demand for such spectacles naturally diminished within that segment of society. However, the games had been deeply ingrained for centuries, and their eradication was a slow, arduous process, not a sudden cessation. A lesser-known detail about this period is the role of Christian martyrs. While many Christians were executed in the arena, thrown to beasts, or forced to fight, their steadfast refusal to renounce their faith, even in the face of death, inadvertently began to change the perception of the arena. Instead of being seen solely as a place of entertainment, it became for Christians a sacred space where faith was tested and affirmed. The blood of martyrs, as Tertullian famously wrote, became the seed of the church. This transformation of meaning, from pagan spectacle to Christian witness, subtly undermined the very foundation of the game's purpose. The final, decisive blow to gladiatorial combat is often attributed to Emperor Honorius. In 399 CE, he closed the gladiatorial schools in Rome, and in 404 CE, a widely cited incident occurred. During a gladiatorial contest in the Colosseum, a Christian monk named Telemachus reportedly rushed into the arena, attempting to separate the gladiators and halt the bloodshed. He was subsequently stoned to death by the enraged crowd. This act of martyrdom, whether entirely factual or embellished by later accounts, is often presented as the catalyst for Honorius's final ban on gladiatorial contests. The historian Theodoret of Cyrus, writing in the mid-5th century, recounts this event, stating that Honorius, moved by Telemachus's sacrifice, issued a decree abolishing the games forever. However, even this final ban was not absolute. While large-scale gladiatorial combat largely ceased in the Western Empire after 404 CE, Records suggest that smaller, more localized contests or private fights may have persisted in some remote areas for a time. The venationes, the animal hunts, continued for much longer, particularly in the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, where they were still performed well into the 6th century. The complete disappearance of all forms of arena combat was a gradual fading, not a sudden extinguishing. The 6th century saw the last recorded venationes in Rome, a far cry from the grand spectacles of earlier eras. The Colosseum, once the vibrant heart of Roman entertainment, began its slow transformation into a quarry for building materials, its arches and walls plundered for other structures. The echoes of the crowd, the clash of steel, and the roars of beasts gradually faded, replaced by the whispers of the wind and the slow march of decay. The legacy of the gladiators, however, did not vanish. Their image, their struggles, and their ultimate fate continued to resonate through the centuries. They became symbols of courage, of resistance, and of the often brutal realities of power. The moral debates sparked by their existence, particularly the Christian opposition, laid some of the groundwork for later discussions about human dignity and the ethics of entertainment. As the Western Roman Empire itself crumbled in 476 CE, giving way to a mosaic of smaller kingdoms, the world that had created and sustained the gladiatorial games was no more. The rise of new social structures, new economic realities, and a dominant Christian worldview had irrevocably altered the cultural landscape. The memory of the gladiators, though, remained, etched into the stones of the arenas and woven into the tapestry of human history. Perhaps these ancient arenas, now silent and open to the stars, still whisper tales of those who once fought within their confines. Tales of the Thracian, the Mamillo, the Retiarius, men whose lives were lived and often ended in the pursuit of glory, freedom, or simply survival, under the gaze of thousands. Their story is a powerful testament to the complexities of human nature, our capacity for both immense cruelty and profound resilience. It reminds us how deeply entwined entertainment can be with power, society, and the evolving moral compass of a civilization. And as we reflect on their history, we are left to ponder the enduring questions they pose about the nature of spectacle, the value of life, and the ever-shifting tides of human morality. The roar of the crowd, once the very heartbeat of Roman life, began to fade. The reasons were complex, a tapestry woven from changing social values, economic shifts, and the slow but inexorable rise of a new spiritual landscape. While the gladiatorial games had been a cornerstone of Roman identity for centuries, their very nature clashed with the burgeoning Christian faith. Early Christian writers, from Tertullian to Lactantius, vehemently condemned the spectacles as barbaric and unholy, a stark contrast to the sanctity of human life they espoused. This moral opposition, initially a minority voice, grew steadily in influence as Christianity gained traction within the empire. By the 4th century CE, the empire itself was undergoing profound transformations. Constantine the Great's conversion to Christianity and his subsequent Edict of Milan in 313 CE, which granted religious tolerance, marked a pivotal turning point. While Constantine himself did not immediately abolish the games, the inertia of tradition was too strong. He did issue an edict in 325 CE against gladiatorial combat, though its practical effect was limited, particularly in the western provinces where the games remained popular. The games were too deeply ingrained in the fabric of Roman society, intertwined with political ambition, public entertainment, and religious festivals, to be simply legislated away. However, the tide was turning. Subsequent emperors, increasingly Christian, continued to chip away at the practice. Theodosius I, who made Nicene Christianity the state religion of the Roman Empire in 380 CE, further restricted pagan practices, and while he did not issue a blanket ban on gladiatorial games, the cultural climate was shifting. The financial burden of staging such elaborate spectacles also became a factor. As the empire faced increasing economic strain and external threats, the vast sums of money required to fund gladiatorial schools, procure exotic beasts, and maintain the arenas could perhaps be better spent elsewhere. The grand public works and lavish entertainments of earlier eras became harder to justify. The traditional date, often cited for the final abolition of gladiatorial contests, is 404 CE. This year is associated with the martyrdom of Saint Telemachus, a monk who, according to historical accounts, attempted to intervene in a gladiatorial combat in the Roman Colosseum, and was subsequently stoned to death by the enraged crowd. This act of self-sacrifice is said to have so moved the Emperor Honorius that he issued a decree formally banning gladiatorial fights between humans. While beast hunts, venationes, and other forms of public spectacle continued for a time, the gladiatorial combat itself, the duel to the death between men, largely faded from the Roman world after this point. It's important to note that this abolition was primarily for the Western Roman Empire. In the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, some forms of gladiatorial contests, particularly those involving condemned criminals, may have persisted in isolated areas for a little longer, but even there, their prominence waned significantly. Yet, the legacy of the gladiators did not vanish with the last clang of steel in the arena. Their image, their stories, and the very concept of their struggles became etched into the collective memory of humanity. For centuries, the ruins of the Colosseum and other amphitheaters stood as silent, monumental testaments to a vanished era, their arches and crumbling walls whispering tales of courage, cruelty, and spectacle. These structures, once vibrant hubs of Roman life, became symbols of both Roman engineering prowess and the more brutal aspects of its culture. In the Renaissance, as scholars rediscovered classical texts, the gladiators re-emerged into public consciousness, albeit often through a romanticized lens. Artists depicted them in heroic poses, emphasizing their strength and skill rather than the grim reality of their existence. The 18th and 19th centuries saw a renewed fascination with ancient Rome, and the gladiators, with their dramatic narratives, were perfect subjects for literature and art. The novel The Last Days of Pompeii by Edward Bulwer Lytton, published in 1834, vividly brought the gladiatorial world to life for a new generation of readers, further embedding their image in popular culture. The 20th and 21st centuries have only amplified this fascination. Hollywood, in particular, has found fertile ground in the gladiatorial arena. Films like Spartacus, 1960, Gladiator, 2000, and numerous television series have reimagined the lives of these ancient fighters, often portraying them as symbols of rebellion, freedom, or tragic heroism. These modern interpretations, while often taking significant liberties with historical accuracy for dramatic effect, have ensured that the image of the gladiator remains potent and recognizable worldwide. The iconic image of a lone warrior, helmeted and armed, facing overwhelming odds, resonates deeply with timeless themes of struggle and survival. However, this enduring popular image often simplifies or even distorts the complex reality of gladiatorial life. The scholarly debate surrounding gladiators is rich and ongoing, touching upon various aspects that popular culture often overlooks. For instance, historians still debate the precise social status of gladiators. While many were slaves, condemned criminals, or prisoners of war, there were also free volunteers, the auctorati, who chose to enter the arena for fame, fortune, or even a perverse sense of honor. What motivated these free men to risk their lives in such a brutal profession? Was it desperation, a thirst for glory, or a combination of factors? The nuances of their motivations and social standing are far more intricate than often portrayed. Another area of scholarly discussion revolves around the extent of public participation and sentiment. While the games were undoubtedly popular and the crowds often demanded blood, was this universal? Were there segments of Roman society who found the games distasteful, even before the rise of Christianity? Some inscriptions and literary references suggest a more varied public opinion than often assumed, hinting at a spectrum of reactions from ecstatic fervor to quiet revulsion. The moral implications of state-sanctioned killing for entertainment are a subject that continues to be explored by modern historians and ethicists, often drawing parallels to contemporary issues. The exact training methods and daily lives within the gladiatorial schools, or ludi, also remain a subject of ongoing archaeological and textual research. While we have some insights from authors like Seneca and Juvenal, and from the remains of ludi unearthed in places like Pompeii, many details are still pieced together through inference and comparative analysis. How rigorous was the training? What was the diet of a gladiator? How much medical care did they receive? The discovery of gladiator cemeteries, like the one in Ephesus, has provided invaluable bioarchaeological data, revealing insights into their diets, injuries, and even their physical prowess, often suggesting a surprisingly well-nourished and medically attended population, a testament to the investment made in these valuable assets. Even the question of the thumbs up, thumbs down gesture, so iconic in popular culture, is a subject of scholarly dispute. The precise meaning of pollice verso, with turned thumb, is not definitively known. Some scholars argue it meant thumb up for death, mimicking a sword thrust, while others contend it meant thumb down, or a clenched fist for mercy. The ambiguity highlights how much of our understanding of ancient gestures and rituals relies on interpretation, and how easily popular narratives can solidify around uncertain historical details. The gladiators, in their paradox of being both revered and reviled, enslaved and celebrated, remain a powerful symbol. They represent the extremes of human nature, the capacity for immense cruelty, and the potential for extraordinary courage. Their story is a mirror reflecting not only the values and vices of ancient Rome, but also enduring questions about entertainment, spectacle, and the human cost of power. From the dust of the arena to the silver screen, their echoes persist, the testament to a unique and unforgettable chapter in human history. The legacy is not just one of violence, but of the human spirit's resilience, even in the most brutal of circumstances, forever etched into the collective consciousness, a silent, powerful narrative that continues to unfold in our imaginations.